This is a mini rig, yeah.
So we can talk about that a little bit. Personally, I'm very interested in the ideology of Bitcoin, or whether the movement has an ideology. Right.
Okay, well, yeah. There's so many different ideologies in the whole Bitcoin community. Some people like the lack of government. Some people like the ability to transfer the funds. Some people just like to make money. Magic money machine.
Right.
So there's so many different views on it, and that's I think why Bitcoin is successful is because it can cater to many different people and many different wants and desires.
Are you ideologically motivated personally? I mean, do you have a...
Well, honestly, at first, when I first got into mining, I was drawn by the magic money machine. It was like free money, hey, print money. And as time went on, I saw the value of Bitcoin beyond just making money, and the way it could potentially transform how people interact in terms of from a financial standpoint. Where if I need to send money to someone in another country, it's instant, it's guaranteed, and there's nobody in the middle taking their cut. And that's one of the most disheartening things I've run into. A lot of people, especially in the poorer countries, where they have to send money back to India or back to Mexico, especially in the U.S. And Western Union charges them $25, $30 to do this, and that's a significant percentage of what they're sending. And it's almost unconscionable. And Bitcoin allows them to send this, and there's no fee. And that can make a huge difference in someone's life, especially when they have no or very little to pay to middlemen on this. So if they can save 10% of what they're sending, that will make a huge difference to many people. And so it's that sort of thing, not necessarily that specifically, but that sort of thing where Bitcoin has become more than just a way to make money. It's a way to empower people, and it's a way to take back control of your finances and not give so much of your production, of your finances, to another party that may or may not deserve them.
So, I mean, it sounds like that is quite a strong ideology in itself. I mean, that's sort of humanitarian, right?
Right. Absolutely.
Do you kind of associate it with, like, the Occupy movement or Anonymous? Or
No. I know those elements are tied into it, and I think they use Bitcoin, but Bitcoin is a platform that those type of elements can use. I don't see Bitcoin as being part of any particular movement. It's a framework that you can build your own ideology around, or you can build whatever you want around Bitcoin. It's a neutral ground for whatever you need to do. And that, I think that is part of the problem and the bad reputation Bitcoin has with some of the government and some of the other interests that see Silk Road, and they hold up Silk Road as, oh, this is what Bitcoin's for. It's for illegal drugs and guns and everything. That's a very small part of Bitcoin. And honestly, I've been working with Bitcoin for almost 2 years now, and I've come across Silk Road maybe once. And there's so much more to Bitcoin. It would be like saying that US dollars are only used for snorting cocaine. It's ridiculous. You know, they can be used for that. They are used for that. But there's so many other uses for the US dollar that pegging the US dollar to snorting cocaine would be ridiculous in anybody's mind. And pegging Silk Road to Bitcoin, while it was a part of Bitcoin in the beginning just because it was so small, we had such a small user base that the amount of people with Silk Road or interested in that sort of thing was in fact disproportionate to the amount of people using it. But as Bitcoin has grown, the Silk Road aspect has stayed basically the same. So their percentage of the entire system and what they're used for has shrunk just by orders of magnitude. And there's so little about with that. And I myself have purchased food. I purchased delicious maple syrup with Bitcoins. I've purchased clothing, I've purchased electronics, I've purchased services, computer services, the money exchange coming here, so I don't have to pay the money exchange fees to place like the place in the airport that charges 15%. So there's so many things that I've purchased and been able to do that Bitcoin has enabled me to do that I wouldn't otherwise be able to do, or if I would, it would be unlikely. I could maybe go to Amazon and buy my syrup, but I'd rather support some local syrup maker in Maine by sending him Bitcoins directly than buying through Amazon. Amazon takes their cut. He has to deal with the Amazon thing. So there's many things that I've done, and Silk Road has never entered my radar. And I could potentially live my whole life just from a day-to-day basis.
There was a report by the FBI on Bitcoin. Did you see that? A sort of publicly released PDF on what they thought the threats of Bitcoin would be like. It would protect child pornographers and drug traffickers and human traffickers.
I believe I saw that. It was a while ago. And Bitcoin is not as anonymous as many people make it out to be. At some point, that money has to change, at least for those type of elements. They want that money to change into something tangible in the real world, be it fiat currency or merchandise or other services. And it's at that point where you have that person's identity. It would be the same as someone writing a check or a credit card. And you can track every transaction in the Bitcoin chain back to its source. So you know where it's come from, you know where it went. And so it's not anonymous, it's not going to hide people. If someone's doing something illegal with it and someone wants to track them down, it's not a lot different than using a credit card or using... There are some anonymous elements to it, but if someone wants to find you badly enough, you can track them through the blockchain.
So these like Pirates of 40 or these theft from Bit4 or Bitcoin, that can be tracked. I mean,
correct. And what's especially for Bit4 as an example, Roman, the operator of Bit4, he knows where the funds are. In terms, by when I say knows, I mean he knows what wallets they're in, and we can monitor if those wallets, if those coins leave those wallets, and we know what IP addresses sent those funds to those wallets. So I believe at the current time he has the FBI requesting the internet service provider to hand over the information of who was on those IPs at that time, and then that will tell us who's in control of those funds. So sure, they can steal the funds quasi-anonymously, but they're linked somehow to those funds, either through IP address or through future transactions. If they were to send those funds somewhere and purchase something and have goods sent to their address, then you could follow the trail that way.
even with like the Bitcoin mixer services, like
The Bitcoin mixers would definitely make it more difficult, and with the proper precautions, you could make it fairly difficult to follow and fairly anonymous. But again, you have the same problem with cash. If I hand you cash on the street for, say, a bag of weed, you're not going to know who I am. I don't know who you are, and we walk away. There's no way to track that. And the mixer is kind of like meeting a guy on the street, and you exchange goods, exchange funds, exchange something, and you both walk away with something different. In this case, a mixer would be you both walk away with different Bitcoins. So it is possible, but it's not as easy as, just I click a button and it's all anonymous. You have to really work at it, just like you have to really work at anonymity in the real world. So it doesn't protect anybody any more than anything else in the real world protects them as far as what you can do to remain anonymous.
so the argument is that it's slightly less anonymous than cash, and criminals still use cash, therefore Bitcoin is an improvement.
It is slightly less anonymous because the blockchain is always there, it's open, and everyone can read it.
Do you want to tell us about the miner?
Sure. The mining rig we have here is called a mini rig, and this particular one mines at 25 gigahash a second, and it contains essentially 18 cards, each with 2 FPGA processors on it. And this is basically the fastest single box mining rig you can buy currently. And what it will do is it basically completes Bitcoin hashes, and it will over the course of time, earn you Bitcoins. Now, do you want me to go into the blockchain?
Well, I think people are quite interested to know, like, that's all really technical. You know, you say 25
Right.
gigahashes, and it's like, I have no idea what that
Absolutely.
means. Your partner described the process of mining to me earlier as providing a service. And I think people can really understand that if there was a global economy of Bitcoin, or Bitcoin was a financial system, then there would be an army of guys with rigs who were crunching the transactions.
Right.
And that would keep the network alive.
Correct.
I think if people really understood that, then they would understand mining in the long term as well. So maybe that's it.
Okay, so what mining is essentially, and if you picture Jenga, everyone knows what Jenga is. So if you picture, instead of getting a big Jenga board that's already assembled, you have the first layer of the Jenga board. You have the one that's called the origin block, and that's what the entire blockchain is built on. And what we do to secure the network is build on that blockchain. So every time we mine a block, when we say mine a block, we're adding a layer to that big Jenga board. And what this does, why this is secure, why this makes it a secure cryptocurrency, is once you have this big stack, you can't just pull out one block from the middle, or the whole top would fall down and crash to the floor. So every time you make a transaction and it's put in a block and it's layered deep down, someone can't come back later and say, I want to change that transaction, I'm taking my money back, or I'm changing the value of the transaction, because it would change everything above it and it would cause everything to crash down. So what mining does is adds all these transactions that Bitcoin does. They adds it to the block, then it adds it to the blockchain. And so when you have a miner, what they're doing, what service they're providing is adding your transaction to the blockchain, which without the miners, you would never get it added to the blockchain, and the transactions would never be completed. So when you have a box like this, it computes the math that's required to secure the cryptocurrency, and it needs essentially needs a special number to be added to the blockchain. And when it finds the special number, and it fits into the blockchain, it's added there, and then we start on the next one. And what happens internally, you can think of it as basically a giant lottery. And currently, you need. Currently, you have with these. This particular one will do 25 billion. It purchases 25 billion lottery tickets per second. And what you're doing when you're mining is you're just trying a random number per hash. So we have 25 billion hashes per second. So you're trying 25 billion different random numbers per second to see if it'll fit in the blockchain. And there's quadrillions of possible combinations, and only one, more than one, but for all intents and purposes, only one will fit. So the first person to find that number will get the reward for that block, and it'll be added to the blockchain. And then the process starts all over again. So what's happening here is 25 billion lottery tickets per second, and you just keep doing that until you find the right number, and it gets added to the blockchain at that point.
Do you think this is like the future of banking? Could you automate banking entirely? The current financial systems, it's very, very complex, and there's a lot of friction involved, there's a lot of fees and the rest of it. Bitcoin's sort of set to decentralize all that, be around quite a lot of corruption.
Right. I don't know that it will replace banking. I think it will change the face of banking, because part of the problem with banking right now and why there's so many different interconnected systems is partially to provide the security, even though in and of itself that security it's providing actually produces less security because there's so many points of failure. Whereas here you have one central blockchain, but that central blockchain is shared by everybody on the network. So not any one individual has control over it. Not any one individual can change it, and it has to be a consensus vote. So it gives the power back to the people for what they want to do with their banking. Now, you also have the other side of it. You know, when people think of banks, they think of, well, that's where I store my money. I have my savings account. that's where I think we may still see the idea of banks, whether it's for bitcoins or another type of cryptocurrency, where you will store your bitcoins for easy access. Uh, right now, it's not really convenient to carry around bitcoins with you. You could potentially do it on your smartphone, but let's say I go to the grocery store in my flip-flops and sweats and I don't have my phone with me. I can't pay with bitcoins. If I don't have some sort of computer with me, I can't pay with bitcoins, and that's a problem. So there will still be need for banks to facilitate the transition from the real world to the digital one, and that's where their role, I think, will lie. Where they maybe store a portion of your bitcoins, and you can spend them somewhere where it doesn't require digital access.
Now, they're not tangible. Is it possible? So what you're saying is that the Bitcoin network, the technology, could back physical currency at points? I mean, could it back a fiat currency?
Absolutely, it could. I don't know that that's the intention, or I don't know that that would necessarily be a good idea, but it could certainly be that. The problem with bitcoins right now is it's very volatile. You have a high swing per day of several dollars occasionally. So it would not be a good way to back a physical type of monetary device, because my coin is worth 10 US dollars today, but tomorrow it's only worth 8, or the next day it's only worth 12.
Do you expect it to go up incrementally? Do you expect it in 100 years to level out, to stabilize, or do you not think?
Absolutely. I think we'll see a stabilization, and the more people adopt it, the more stable the currency will be. Right now, we have very low liquidity, and that's due to the fact that we don't have a lot of people using it compared to, say, the U.S. dollar. The U.S. dollar is so stable primarily, and I say that kind of tongue-in-cheek at the moment, but it's so stable because there's so many people using it that any one individual or group of individuals can't necessarily affect the price. They can't hoard enough, or they can't spend enough to affect the price. Right now, you could have someone put enough bitcoins on the market, or buy enough bitcoins from the market to affect the price dramatically. So that's why it's so volatile, because the liquidity and the volume isn't high enough. When more people use the currency, the liquidity and volume will increase and the price will continue to stabilize.
So you touched on an interesting point. If JP Morgan or somebody, big bank came along and bought, say, $50 million worth of Bitcoin, $51 million worth of Bitcoin, they kind of go for half of the current economy.
Right?
They could affect the global Bitcoin movement, right?
Absolutely.
Kind of buy it out.
Right, and that would raise the price to astronomical levels. And then if they sold, it would, of course, crash the market at that point.
And so Bitcoin is actually still vulnerable to those kind of attacks more than anything else?
Yes, unfortunately, right now, even a moderately funded corporation or something could crash the Bitcoin market or cause wild swings. It would take, just not even $10 million to move the market wherever you wanted to move it. You can move it anywhere for $10 million. And that's the problem with we need the volume, we need the liquidity, and that will stabilize it. Much like we need the hashing power on the network to prevent an entity from gaining what's called a 51% attack, where they have 51% of the hashing power. And just like in voting, if you have 51% of the votes, you can do whatever you want. If you have 51% of the hashing power, you can do whatever you want to the Bitcoin network. We're almost over the hump where it would be very difficult to gain that much hashing power on the network, but we're still very much in the danger zone for our liquidity and our volume. One entity could easily affect the market in ways that would be very undesirable.
I'm so tired. That's a really long interview. I always have more questions as well. That's the other thing. think people are always, everybody's first question is, well, it's it's what is it backed by, that kind of thing. I'm sort of satisfied that it's worked, it works, and it's backed by trust and real goods. There's real value in the economy.
Right.
Is there anything that you think is really important that people don't know that they kind of need to know? And do you want to see it taken up as a global currency, as like a world currency, a really strong thing? Are you an evangelist? Do you believe 100% in it?
Absolutely. I absolutely believe in Bitcoin, and what I see Bitcoin as being is the people's currency. It won't necessarily be a global currency where banks are using it to trade or corporations are using it to trade value. It will be a currency where people use it to trade value. If I need to send something to India, or I need to send something to Mexico, or to someone somewhere else in the world, I can do that via Bitcoin. And I can do that instantly, I can do that cheaply, and that's where I think it's going to see a value. I think that's where it'll see a foothold. Whether or not a government ever adopts it, or a large bank or a large corporation, I wouldn't certainly discount it, but I don't necessarily see that as being terribly likely or even desirable. Yes, I've seen that, and I think it's. I don't see any future for that. It's still a stored value. You have to put your fiat currency in it, and then you spend that fiat currency in a digital form. Whereas Bitcoin is a currency. While you can convert it from fiat currency, you don't put currency in it and then you spend it. You spend the currency. You spend the Bitcoin. You don't spend the value stored in the Bitcoin. And I think it's a subtle distinction some people may not quite understand until they stop and think about it and realize it's a very important difference.
This is a kind of emergent technology. It's very grassroots, right? It's
Absolutely.
decentralized in its nature. It's not backed or created by a government, and its value is derived from pure consensus and intellectual capital.
Yes, it's backed by the people who use it. And unlike the fiat currency where someone says, okay, I will assign a value to this, and that puts the control to that person or entity that assigns the value. And that's a problem. They can say, this is now worth half of what it was before. Your money just went poof, and you did nothing. Whereas Bitcoin is backed by the people that use it, and no one can say, oh, well, now it's only worth half of what it's worth. No one can do that. It's worth whatever someone else is willing to pay for it. And it's the ultimate form of currency that, since it is decentralized, that is disconnected from any controlling entity, and it can't be artificially manipulated in that fashion. Okay. Yeah, sure.